Jordan, let's have you jump in on this idea of what you see as the pernicious danger of groupthink when it comes to ethnicity, when it comes to gender. Why do you think that's one of the primal sins, in your view, of quote, political correctness?
Well, I think it's one of the primal sins of identity politics players on the left and the right, just to be clear about that. Personally, since this has got personal at times, I'm no fan of the identitarian right. I think that anybody who plays a game, a conceptual game where group identity comes first and foremost, risks an exacerbation of tribalism. It doesn't matter whether it's on the left or the right. With regards to the idea of group rights, well, there's a fundamental, and this is something we've fallen into terribly in Canada, not least because we had to contend with the threat of Quebec separatism, but the idea of group rights is extraordinarily problematic because the obverse of the coin of individual rights is individual responsibilities. And you can hold an individual responsible, and an individual can be responsible. And so that's partly why individuals have rights. But groups, how do you hold a group responsible? I mean, the whole idea is it's not a good idea to hold a group responsible. First of all, it flies in the face of the idea of the sort of justice systems that we've laid out in the West that are essentially predicated first on the assumption of individual innocence, but also on the possibility of individual guilt, not group guilt. We saw what happened in the 20th century many, many times when the idea of group guilt was enabled to get a foothold, let's say, in the polity and in the justice system. It was absolutely catastrophic. And so, okay, fine, group rights. Well, how are you going to contend with the alternative to that, the opposite of that? Or where's the group responsibility? And how are you going to hold your groups responsible? Well, we don't have to talk about that because we're too concerned with rectifying historical injustices, hypothetical and otherwise. And that's certainly not to say that there weren't any shortage of absolutely catastrophic historical injustices. That's not the point. The point is how you view the situation at the most fundamental level. And group rights are an absolute catastrophe, in my opinion.
I'm still very lost about why we aren't talking about political correctness. We're talking about politics, and that's fine. And I share exactly what you think about it. I'm not an enemy of identity politics per se. I can obviously see where it goes wrong and where it's annoying. Let's be empirical about this. How well is it working for you in America at the moment? Well, not well at all. Really isn't. Right. You can answer me in a moment. The reason that Trump and Brexit in Britain and all kinds of nativists all over Europe are succeeding is not the triumph of the right. It's the catastrophic failure of the left. It's our fault. We absolutely... My point is not that I've turned to the right or anything like that, or that I'm nice and fluffy and want everybody to be decent. I'm saying, fuck political correctness. Resist. Fight. If you have a point of view, fight it in the proper manner, using democracy as it should be, not channels of education, not language. You know, it's so silly. But there's a chess rule, you know. In chess, the best move to play in chess is not the best chess move. It's the move your opponent least wants you to play. At the moment, you're being recruiting sergeants for the right. By annoying and upsetting, and instead of fighting, either fighting or persuading. But political correctness is a middle course that simply doesn't work.
Well, first of all, you said be empirical. Now, empirical, as far as I know, the word means that which can be verified or falsified through the census.
Exactly.
So if we look at it in an objective way, the reality is that people don't have equal access to the means to articulate the very moment you're talking about.
I'm talking about the empirical results of this political attitude.
I understand that, but my point is simply this. I'm suggesting to you that people use the weapons at hand. Now, it was Abraham Joshua Heschel, the rabbi, who said, everybody's not guilty, but everybody's responsible. Right? That's a distinction there. Everybody clearly is not guilty, but what's interesting, look at the flip side. If you have benefited from 300 years of holding people in servitude, thinking that you did it all on your own. Why can't these people work harder? Let me see, for 300 years, you ain't had no job. So the reality is, for 300 years, you hold people in the bands. You hold them in subordination. You refuse to give them rights. Then all of a sudden, you free them and say you're now individuals, not having the skills, not having the skills. I'm talking about America, first of all. I'm talking about American society, first of all. I'm talking about the Northern Hemisphere. I'm talking about every society where enslavement has existed, but I'm speaking specifically of the repudiation of individual rights among people of color in America who were denied the opportunity to be individuals. So I obviously and ideally, and I think Michelle Goldberg does too, agree with the emphasis on individuals. What we're saying to you is that we have not been permitted to be individuals. We have not been permitted to exercise our individual autonomy and authority, and the refusal to do so, to recognize me as an individual, means when you roll up on me and I'm a 12-year-old boy in a park and you shoot first, in ways you do to black kids that you don't do to white kids, you are not treating that person as an individual. If we're living in a society where women are subject to aberrant forms of horrid, patriarchal, sexist, and misogynist behavior, you are not acknowledging the centrality of the individuality of women. You are treating them according to a group dynamic. And if we get beyond the ability of people on the right to understand the degree to which they have operated from the basis of benefit from group identity without having said, I'll end by saying this. The great American philosopher Beyonce Knowles said that it has been said that racism is so American that if you challenge racism, you look like you're challenging America. We are challenging inequality. We are challenging the refusal to see me as an individual. When we overcome that, have at it, we're all on equal plane.
I think it's fine. I think it's good.
The pot is getting stirred here.
So I've got a couple of questions.
So let's your side spoke, so I'm going to go to Jordan, then to you,
Let's
Michelle.
assume for a moment that I've benefited from my white privilege. Okay, so let's assume that. That's fine.
Assumption.
That's what you would say. So, so let's say, here, let's get precise about this, okay?
Was that very individual of you?
Let's get precise about this, okay?
Let's get precise.
To what degree is my present level of attainment or achievement a consequence of my white privilege? And I don't mean sort of. I mean, do you mean 5%? Do you mean 15%? Do you mean 25%? Do you mean 75%? And what do you propose I do about it? How about a tax? How about a tax that's like specialized for me so that I can account for my damn privilege, so that I can stop hearing about it? Now, let's get precise about one other thing, okay? We'll get precise about one other thing. Now,
Precise?
Yeah, precise, yes. And so, if we can agree, and we haven't, that the left can go too far, which it clearly can, then how would my worthy opponents precisely define when the left that they stand for has gone too far? You didn't like equity, equality of outcome. I think that's a great marker. But if you have a better suggestion and won't sidestep the question, so let's figure out how I can dispense with my white privilege, and so that you can tell me when the left has gone too far, since they clearly can. And that's what this debate is about political correctness. It's about the left going too far. And I think it's gone too far in many ways. And I'd like to figure out exactly how and when, so the reasonable left could make its ascendance again and we could quit all this nonsense.
Okay, Michelle, go ahead.
Do you mind,
I want to come to you on those, great, Michelle, on Jordan's point about how does he, in a sense, get an equal voice in this debate back if it is implied that his participation brings with it this baggage of white privilege that doesn't allow him to see clearly the issues that are before us.
But that is to be complicit in the very problem itself terminologically. You're beginning at a point that's already productive and controversial. You're saying, how can he get his equality back? Who are you talking about? Jordan Peterson, trending #1 on Twitter? Jordan Peterson, with an international bestseller? I want him to tweet something out about me in my book. Jordan Peterson, right? This is what I'm saying to you. Why the rage, bruh? You're doing well, but you're a mean, mad white man. And you're going to get us right. And I have never seen so much wine and snowflaking. There's enough wine in here to start a vineyard. And what I'm saying to you empirically and precisely, when you ask the question about white privilege, the fact that you ask it in the way you did, dismissive, pseudoscientific, non-empirical, and without justification, the truth is that white privilege doesn't act according to quantifiable segments. It's about the degree to which we are willing as a society to grapple with the ideals of freedom, justice, and equality upon which it's based. Number two, what's interesting to me, you're talking about not having a collective identity. What do you call a nation? Are you Canadian? Are you Canadian by yourself? Are you an individual, or are you part of a group? When America formed its union, it did so in opposition to another group. So the reality is that those who are part of group identities in politics deny the legitimacy and validity of those groups and the fact that they have been created thusly, and then have resentment against others. All I'm asking for is the opportunity. The quotation you talk about, the difference between equality of outcome and equality of opportunity, that's a staid and retried argument, hackneyed phrase derived from the halcyon days of the debate over affirmative action. Are you looking for outcomes that can be determined equally, or are you looking for opportunity? If you free a person after a whole long time of oppression and say now you are free to survive, if you have no skills, if you have no quantifiable means of existence, what you have done is liberated them into oppression. And all I'm suggesting to you, Lyndon Baines Johnson, one of our great presidents, said, if you start a man in a race 100 years behind, it is awfully difficult to catch up. So I don't think Jordan Peterson is suffering from anything except an exaggerated sense of entitlement and resentment, and his own privilege is invisible to him, and it's manifest with lethal intensity and ferocity right here on stage.
Jordan, I'm going to have to let you respond to that if you would.
Well, what I derive from that series of rebuttals, let's say, is twofold. The first is that saying that the radical left goes too far when they engage in violence is not a sufficient response by any stretch of the imagination, because there are sets of ideas in radical leftist thinking that led to the catastrophes of the 20th century, and that was at the level of idea, not at the level of violent action. It's a very straightforward thing to say you're against violence. It's like being against poverty. It's like, you know, generically speaking, decent people are against poverty and violence. It doesn't address the issue in the least. And with regards to my privilege or lack thereof, I mean, I'm not making the case that I haven't had advantages in my life and disadvantages in my life like most people. You don't know anything about my background or where I came from, and it doesn't matter to you because fundamentally I'm a mean white man. That's a hell of a thing to say in a debate.
Let me just say.
Very, very brief, because I want to move on to men and women. A good topic next.
The mean mad white comment was not predicated upon my historical excavation of your past. It's based upon the evident vitriol with which you speak and the denial of a sense of equanimity among combatants in an argument. So I'm saying again, you're a mean mad white man, and the viciousness is evident.
Okay. Okay. Let's reset.
Very confused by this. Of course, I recognize the bestiality of Weinstein and the monstrosity of his behavior, and it was shocking to me. I actually worked for him, script doctoring, as it's called. I never had the bathroom towel, but for pretty obvious reasons. But it's, grotesque, and I can't imagine how vile it must be for such a powerful man, and he was. I used to play a game at the Cannes Film Festival where, in his years of power, we're walking from one hotel at the end there, all the way up to the Palais de Festival. You would get 10 points every time you heard the word Harvey. And you'd usually, a 10-minute walk, you'd have 300 points. Because it was, yeah, Harvey's got the script, Harvey's got it. Yeah, I've got a meeting with Harvey at the Majestic in the afternoon. He was immensely powerful. And I think that's obvious that someone in that position, abusing and threatening and hindering the livelihood of women is grotesque in the extreme. But I have to tell you, there is genuine feeling amongst many people I know that that we can't speak our minds. We can't actually speak to the true nuance, the true depth of sexual, romantic feeling between men and women. It's not a subject I'm absolutely expert on, but it counts between men and men as well, though I know when it's men and men, you might say, well, that's different because women have had a different experience in history, and I don't want to enter that particular field, but I would say that there is real fear in my business, which is where this all started, show business, acting, and so on. Yeah, people are rather afraid to speak about a piece of, publicity that's come out or a statement that's been made. You just go, yeah, absolutely, and wait for the people to leave the room before you can speak honestly with your friends. And I've never experienced that in my entire 60 years on this planet. This feeling that, and I'm not characterizing feminists as in East German, but it's like that, the Stasi are listening. You better be careful, they're listening. And that's a genuine feeling. I'm saying that with my hand on my heart. I'm not saying it to make a point other than the fact that it's true and it's worrying. But the sexual misadventures and horror experience is worrying too. So there are two worries, and they're not solved.
Let's bring Jordan in on this, because you've written and commented about it a lot. But Stephen, thank you for having me ready.
Well, I think I'm going to point out two things again. The first is that my question about when the left goes too far still hasn't been answered. And then the second thing I'm going to point out is that, it's conceivable that I am a mean man. I mean, maybe I'm meaner than some people and not as mean as others. I think that's probably more the case. But I would say the fact that race got dragged into that particular comment is a better exemplar of what the hell I think is wrong with the politically correct left than anything else that could have possibly happened.
That was funny. Imagine the hurt, the anxiety, the insult that you might genuinely feel, according to what I felt was an appropriate comment of description at the moment of its expression. But imagine now those hurt feelings and
not hurt.
Okay, you feel great. You feel great about it.
That's really different. I'm not a victim. I'm not hurt. I'm appalled.
You're not hurt. Okay, you wouldn't be a victim. So what's interesting is that whatever non-traditional feelings of empathy you endure at this particular point, the point is, imagine then the horrors that so many others have had to put up with for so long when they are refused to acknowledge their humanity. Now, I take your point seriously.
So your group of
let me finish. Let me finish, though. Let me finish.
To me.
Let me finish, sir.
That figures.
You're not my inquisitioner, okay? What I'm saying to you is that when you said you were upset that I added the element of race there, right? When I said mean, mad, white man. Well, what's interesting is that you may have felt that you were being ascribed a group identity to which you do not subscribe. You may have felt that you were being unfairly judged according to your particular race. You may have felt that your individual identity was being besmirched by my rather careless characterization of you, all of which qualifies for a legitimate, response to me, but also the point we've been trying to make about the refusal to see our individual existence as women, as people of color, as First Nation people, and the like. My point simply has been, the reason I talked about race in that particular characterization, because there's a particular way in which I have come to a city. I don't know if there are a lot of black people out here, not sure. But I constantly come to places and spaces that are not my natural habitat, other than intellectual engagement and the love and the fury of rhetorical engagement, yes. But I often go into hostile spaces where people will not vote in favor for my particular viewpoint because I'm interested as an individual of breaking down barriers so that people can understand just how complicated it is. So what I'm saying to you is that I would invite you, in terms of the surrender of your privilege, to give you a specific response. Come with me to a Black Baptist church. Come with me to a historically black college. Come to me to an indigenous or First Nations community where we're able to engage in some of the lovely conversation, but also to listen and hear. And when I added race to that, I was talking about the historically evinced inability to acknowledge others' pains equally to the one that they are presently enduring. So, as a human being, I love you as my brother, but I stand by my comment.
Well, I've seen the sorts of things that you're talking about. I happen to be an honorary member of an indigenous family, so don't tell me about what I should go see with regards to oppression. You don't know anything about me.
You asked me a question, I gave you a response.
Yeah. You gave me a generic response,
it's
a generic race-based response.
Jordan Peterson, I would like for you to come with me, Michael Eric Dyson, to a Black Baptist church. You been to one of those?
I would be happy to do that, by the way.
Okay, all right, I'm going to hook you up.
Okay,
right.
Good. We'll make sure that happens. One more quick round, and then we're going to go to closing statements. And Stephen Fry, I want to get your response to why, a generation from now, looking back on this debate, we're not going to see this, quote, so-called politically correct movement in the same way, let's say, that we now understand the positive contributions of the civil rights movement. That was a movement that advanced a series of ideas about human dignity to people who previously didn't have that dignity. We're now having another debate, another social debate about different groups and communities we're trying to convey a sense of new dignity to them. Why won't this be, in a sense, looked back upon as something positive a generation from now?
I think people will look back on this debate and wonder why political correctness wasn't discussed. I said it was slippery. I mean, it's interesting to hear talk about race and about gender and about equality, and it's something that I've thought about a lot and I can learn a great deal about, but that's not why I came to this debate. I was interested in what I've always been interested in, the suppression of language and thought, the closing down, the rationalist idea that seems beguiling, that if you limit people's language, it may somehow teach them a different way of thinking. Something that would have delighted the inventors of George Orwell's Newspeak, for example. And it seems to me it's just implausible. It doesn't work. And that's what I mean by empirical. It doesn't stand an empirical test. It isn't experientially validated, as we see from the political landscape now, and I worry that we may in the future. So I'm sort of disappointed that the subject has just revolved around academia, which was predictable, because that's the sort of crucible in which these elements are mixed. But even more disappointed that really I haven't heard from Michelle or from Professor Dyson as to what they think political correctness is, because what they've talked about is basically saying progress, in our view, is progress. Well, I agree. That's, yeah. So it is too. And good on progress. But how is it that you're saying that what we call political correctness, you call progress? That's what you're supposed to be arguing. I want to know what you mean by political correctness.
Well, okay. So like I said, the reason a few months ago, right, you contacted me, asked if I wanted to do a debate about identity politics, and then you presented me with this resolution, and I said, well, there's a lot of things that people call political correctness that I'm not going to defend. But then I realized who I was debating and saw that there was a lot of things that you, Jordan Peterson, call political correctness that I call progress. And to some extent, you too, Stephen Fry, when you talk about it being outrageous to tear down, or not outrageous, I won't put words in your mouth, but that we shouldn't be tearing down statues of kind of notorious racists, that we should just instead be throwing eggs at them. So those sorts of things, if you call them political correctness, I call them progress. Now, this feeling of being silenced, which I understand, although it seems very vague, right? You kind of are not quite putting your finger on who is silencing you, except for a vague fear that if you say something untoward, you're going to be the subject of, I'm not sure.
Yes.
Shaming, but by who?
Yeah.
But by what? By the internet?
I'm not saying their names. That's
no, but I
the
mean,
point. I'm scared.
If I'm listed,
that's the point.
You're scared.
It is a culture of
right.
fear.
I understand there's that element of fear. What I'm saying is that it's a feeling. It's a feeling that is this sort of intangible result of, I think, primarily.
We've all seen the sort of show trial thing where the person then apologizes. I have so much to learn about sexual politics. I am really sorry. Signed a lawyer, crossed out the name of the person. You think the real mistake of our left is that we underestimate the right. The right isn't as stupid as we'd like them to be. If only they were. If only they weren't so cunning, so sly, so smart, so aware of our shortcomings. And I just fear that political correctness is a weapon that they value, that the more we tell the world how people should be treated, how language should be treated, what words are acceptable, what attitudes are acceptable, what HR meeting is going to tell you in a long bullet-pointed list about how you look at people. All of this is meat and drink to bad people, to malefactors, to bad actors. I'm not counting myself as one of those bad actors in that sense. I mean bad actors in the other sense.
Right, So there are, like I said, there are a lot of ways in which I agree with you, although I would like to hear, I mean, to turn it back on you, I would like to hear you say, you know, what are the words that have fallen into disrepute that you think we should be resurrecting, right? I mean, to me, this is this area of like hotly contested social change right now, where a lot of people feel
it's about words that have gone into disuse. It's very often phrases, jargonistic slogans, heteronormative, cisgendered, those kind of things. They're just an insult. You know, imagine you're a young student arriving at university and someone's bombarding you with this preposterous hermeneutical nonsense from misread textbooks, misread Foucault, if I may say, misread Derrida, and so on. Because I was at Cambridge, England, doing English literature. We had our French phase, and there's value in that. It's an interesting game, and it is. It's a place to. I think I'd just really say that the ghost hovering over me it's a letter Oscar Wilde wrote, and he said to Bosie, his love, he said, the fact that you didn't get a degree is nothing, but you never acquired what is sometimes called the Oxford manner, and I'll say for that, the university manner. He said, Oscar said, I take that to mean the ability to play gracefully with ideas. I think that's disappearing from our culture, and I think it's a terrible thing.
Let's go to Michael and back to Michelle.
It's hard to be the self-deprecating Englishman. It's
You've no idea.
But no, I got a pretty good idea here today. But what's interesting, I don't recall, and all of us have studied history, I don't recall these debates about political correctness happening when people who were in power were in absolute power, unquestioned power. Political correctness, right? Political correctness becomes an issue. And what I mean by that is people who used to have power, who still have power but think they don't, who get challenged on just a little bit of what they have and don't want to share toys in the sandlot of life. So all of a sudden it becomes a kind of exaggerated grievance. Now the things you named, the bullet points and the cisgender and the heteronormativity and the heteropatriarchy and the capitalist resurgence and the insurrection of subjugated knowledges, to give Foucault some more love, or the Derridian deconstruction, all that stuff. The French phase is still going on with the French fries in America. What's interesting is that I didn't hear many complaints of political correctness at the height of the dominance of one group or another. But when Martin Luther King Jr., who argued for group identity as a black person to provide an opportunity for individual black people to come to the fore, they began to make that claim. Oh, now they didn't call it political correctness. You're siding with those who are against free speech. You're siding with those who don't want me as a white person to be recognized in my humanity. And what I mean by political correctness is the kind of politics of ressentiment that are articulated by various holders of power at certain levels, at various levels. that one of the beautiful things about Foucault that I take as opposed to Max Weber is that Foucault said power breaks out everywhere. I would think a person who's critical of political correctness like you would appreciate this, as opposed to Max Weber, who said power is over there in a hierarchical structure where subordination is the demand. Foucault said no, power breaks out even among people who are disempowered. So you can hurt somebody in your own community. What's more politically incorrect than a black Baptist preacher identifying with a first century Palestinian Jew and still loving atheists? What's more politically incorrect than a black intellectual going on Bill Maher and defending his ability to continue to have his show despite using the N-word? I, sir, believe in a politically incorrect version. When I go as a black Baptist preacher to chastise my fellow believers about their homophobia, that goes over like a brick cloud. When I come into arenas like this, I understand that my back is up against the wall. But I think,
come and sit over here.
I want to sit on. I want to sit on your lap. I want to sit on your lap in a while. But what I'm saying to you, but don't get excited. But what I'm saying to you,
don't flatter yourself.
Oh, that's all right. I see how you've been looking at me. So what's interesting is that when we look at the way in which we as societies, in a free Canadian society and a free American society, when I look at what is seen as political correctness, it to me has been a mass of jumble that has been carved together out of the politics of resentment that powers once held no longer are held. Freedoms once exercised absolutely must now be shared. So I am in agreement with both of my gentlemen to my right who believe that political correctness has been a scourge, but not necessarily the way you think so. I think it's been a scourge because those who have been the deployers of power and the beneficiaries of privilege have failed to recognize their particular way. And at the end of the day, I think that those of us who are free citizens of this country and of America should figure out ways to respect the humanity of the other, to respect the individual existence of the other, but also respect the fact that there have been barriers placed upon particular groups that have prevented them from flourishing. That's all I mean by political correctness.
Okay, well said. I'm going to give, before we go to closing statements, the final words on this topic to Michelle and then you, Jordan.
So I think part of the frustration here is that I think that both of you have radically different ideas of what we're talking about when we talk about political correctness. It seems to me that you're talking about politically correctness. You mean this kind of feeling of anxiety that a lot of people feel because we all live now in this terrible crowdsourced panopticon when you worry that any stray phrase that you use will be, any stray phrase you utter might be used to defame you, right? And I think that a lot of people feel that anxiety. I disagree that that is something that is being solely kind of perpetrated against, you know, insouciant kind of Oscar Wildean figures by a censorious left-wing horde, because it's coming from all directions, right? This phenomenon, which sucks, is all over the place. I mean, I get it when I write something critical of the way that the IDF behaved in Gaza. You know, it's coming at everyone, and I think that there's a way in which when it comes at a certain sort of figure and there's a certain set of complaints, and you feel unjustly criticized and you feel silenced, which again I think is really different than being silenced. You call it political correctness, and I would like the culture also to be more, you know, freewheeling. I think one solution, you know, you're not going to kind of get the left to I don't know, they can't kind of put an end to this because it is much more of a mob social media phenomenon than it is kind of some diktat coming up from on high. And so really the only way to break through it is to say what you say that you're afraid to say, right? I mean, that's the only way to sort of pop this bubble or kind of end this anxiety, or at least diffuse it a little bit. Whereas, again, what I hear Mr. Peterson talking about as political correctness is something much more broad and much more kind of much more fundamental to social change. And you're talking about, you know, you want me to define, or one of us to talk about when the left goes too far. And if I'm, you know, I certainly don't want to be a woman putting words in your mouth, but if I hear you correctly, what you're saying is that you want me to kind of renounce Marxist categories, or to...
It's up to you.
Well,
I just want you to do it. I want you to define when the left goes too far. You can do it any way you want.
Like I said, I think that the left goes too far when it is violent or censorious, when it tries to shut people down or no platform them, or when it acts violently. I'm not sure what you expect
Something
beyond
deeper.
that. Something deeper, how?
Yeah. Well, I'd like you to contend with the set of left-wing ideas that produced all the left-wing pathologies of the 20th century, and to define how you think standard left-wing thinking, which has a valuable place, goes too far, since it obviously does.
Has the right gone too far? Has the right gone too far?
Of course the right
How?
has gone
Tell
too
us
far.
how.
Well, how about Auschwitz?
I mean...
Well, I was talking about 20th century
right?
politics.
What else? More recently, what has gone wrong with the right?
Look, I don't like identity politics players at all. I don't care whether they're on the left or the right. I've been lecturing about right-wing extremism for 30 years. I'm no fan of the right, despite the fact that the left would like to paint me that way because it's more convenient
How has the
for
right
them.
gone too far recently?
Well, where? It's threatening to go too far in identitarian Europe, that's for sure. It's gone too far in Charlottesville. It went too far in Norway. Like, how long a list do you want? And why am I required to produce that? To show you that I don't like the identitarian
us,
right?
I just thought I'd ask you.
I was actually asking you a question. So your assumption is somehow that I must be on the side of the right. It's like, look, the right hasn't occupied the humanities and the social sciences. It's as simple as that for me. If they had, I'd be objecting to them.
Say that again, I didn't hear that.
The right has not occupied the social sciences and the humanities. And the left clearly has. The statistical evidence for that is overwhelming.
Sir, what about IQ testing in terms of genetic inheritance?
Sorry, we're here to talk about political correctness, and we've done a damn poor job of it.
I see. I gave you an example.
Okay,
now
let's,
you can't answer it.
let's all then redeem ourselves with our closing statements. I'm going to put 3 minutes on the clock. We're going to go in the reverse order of the opening. So, Stephen, you're up first.
Oh, lordy, lordy.
Yes, up.
There we are. I'll hide behind the lectern in that case. Well, I've been fascinated by this conversation. There's been an enormous clash of cultures in the conversation. We've had, you know, classic, if I can call it, huckstering snake oil pulpit talk, which is, it's a mode of discourse, it's a rhetorical style that I find endlessly refreshing and vivifying, but I'm not sure that we actually focused on the point in question. And my objection has always been towards orthodoxies. I'm a heterodox and a contrarian, and I can't help myself. And I think there's been an underestimation of the fact that language does affect people. It does make the young in particular, as they're starting out on their educational or their work careers, it makes them very anxious, it makes them very angry, very upset, very alienated, to feel that they don't know anymore how to operate in the world, how to engage in relationships, how to think honestly. So they accrete more and more to their own mini groups. And I think that's dangerous and unhappy for society. I think it's reflected in a paucity of cinema and literature and art, and the culture generally, is that there's a fear that's pervading it. And while people can talk to academia and say, you should come and see our lessons, our lectures are open and free and ideas are exchanged, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure it's true, but I don't think we should underestimate how much this feeling is prevalent in the culture of this strange paradox that the liberals are illiberal in their demand for liberality. They are exclusive in their demand for inclusivity. They are homogeneous in their demand for heterogeneity. They are somehow undiverse in their call for diversity. You can be diverse but not diverse in your opinions and in your language and in your behavior. And that's a terrible pity. So I would say that I'm sorry that it got a bit heated in places, because I was hoping it wouldn't. I was hoping it would be a shining example of how people of all different kinds of political outlooks can speak with humor and wit and a lightness of touch, as G.K. Chesterton said. Angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. And I think it's very important for us, who are privileged, all four of us, privileged to be here, to be asked to be here, to take ourselves a little bit more lightly, not to be too earnest, too pompous, too serious, and not to be too certain. It's a time, I think, for really engaging, emotionally fulfilling, passionate and positive doubt. That's what I would urge. Thank you.
Michael, we're going to put 3 minutes on the clock for you. Please, your closing.
Thank you so much for that compliment, Brother Fry. I'm used to not exclusively white men who see black intelligence articulated at a certain level feeling a kind of condescension. If I came up here, Mr. I was saying the other day, but a kind of verbal facility automatically assumed to be a kind of hucksterism and snake oil salesman. I've seen that. I get it. I get hate letters every day from white brothers and sisters who are mad I'm teaching their children. You're just trying to co-opt our children. You're trying to corrupt them. Yes, I'm trying to corrupt them so they will be uncorrupted by the corruptibility that they've inherited from a society that refuses to see all people as human beings. The death threats I have received constantly for simply trying to speak my mind, it's not about a politically correct society that is open-minded and that has some consternation about my ability to speak. I'm getting real live. You want empirical death threats that talk about killing me, setting up to hurt me and harm me, simply because I choose to speak my mind. I agree with my confreres and my compatriots that we should argue against the vicious limitation and recursions against speech. I believe that everybody has the right to be able to articulate themselves, and the enormous privilege we have to come to a spot in a space like this means that we have that privilege and we should be responsible for it. No matter where we go from here, me and Brother Peterson will go to a Black Baptist church. I'm going to hold him to that. He said it on national TV. We're going to go to a Black Baptist church and have an enlightening conversation about the need for us to engage in not only reciprocal and mutual edification, but criticism, even hard and tough criticism, but in a way that speaks to the needs and interests of those who don't usually get on TV, whose voices are not usually amplified, whose ideas are not usually taken seriously. And when they get to the upper echelons of the ability of a society to express themselves, they are equally subject to vicious recrimination and hurtful resistance. There's an old story about the pig and the pig and the chicken going down the street and said, let's have breakfast. The chicken just has to give up an egg. The pig has to give up his ass in order to make breakfast. We have often been the pigs giving up our asses to make breakfast. Let's start sharing them asses with everybody else. Thank you.
So I'm not here to claim that there's no such thing as oppression, unfairness, brutality, discrimination, unfair use of power, all of those. Anyone with any sense knows that hierarchical structures tilt towards tyranny, and that we have to be constantly wakeful to ensure that all they are isn't power and tyranny. It's interesting to hear Foucault referred to. It's unfortunate, but it's interesting. You know, because Foucault, like his French intellectual confreres, essentially believed that the only basis upon which hierarchies were established is power. And that's part of this pernicious politically correct doctrine that I've been speaking about. When a hierarchy becomes corrupt, then the only way to ascend it is to exercise power. That's essentially the definition of a tyranny. But that doesn't mean that the imperfect hierarchies that we have constructed in our relatively free countries, which at least tilt somewhat towards competence and ability, as evidenced by the staggering achievements of civilization that we've managed to produce, it doesn't mean that the appropriate way of diagnosing them is to assume without reservation unidimensionally that they're all about power, and as a consequence everyone who occupies any position within them is a tyrant or a tyrant in the making. And that is certainly the fundamental claim of someone like Foucault. And it's part and parcel of this, what would you call it, this ideological catastrophe that's political correctness. I'm not here to argue against progress. I'm not here to argue against equality of opportunity. Anyone with any sense understands that even if you're selfish, you're best served by allowing yourself access to the multiplicitous talents of everyone, and to discriminate against them for arbitrary reasons unrelated to their competences. It's abhorrent. That has nothing to do with the issue at hand. It isn't that good things haven't happened in the past and should continue to happen. That's not the point. The point is the point my compatriot Fry made, which is, well, we can agree on the catastrophe and we can agree on the historic inequity, but there's no way I'm going to agree that political correctness is the way to address any of that, and there's plenty of evidence to the contrary, some of which I would say was displayed quite clearly tonight.